Hello, bonjour. Welcome to another production for Nezo's Bad Shop. I'm Nezo. How are you guys doing? Comment ça va? I'm doing pretty good. Ça va bien. And you're looking at the Sakura D5 Lite. It's all put together. Look at it. It's just so cute. Look at it. It's so cute. Adorable would be another word. And it actually drives like really well on track. When we were testing it on late Saturday night, when I finally started filming the shakedown videos, this car was a lot of fun to drive. We all had big smiles driving around because it actually drives really good out of the box with the box manual setting. And I was happy. I was impressed, and it was on the plastic shocks, you know, like, it works really good. Almost, I want to say, it's right up there with, I think, when the first mid-motored D5 entered the market. It drives that good, and because they moved the motor more mid, along the battery here, it just seems even more stable than the other the full-size MR. Sorry, that's what I was saying, and I mean like by like a small amount, but I mean it drives really good. Anyways, this is the Constructor's Digest for this car. So you can see I've got it built, and I've made some notes in the manual. We're gonna go through them step by step. All right. First thing I want to tell you. They say it right here. Only accepted low-profile battery, max high 21mm. What they're saying here is the sizing of the battery that will fit. You can run basically a 1S size LiPo, but there's many shorty sized LiPo batteries that are offered in 1S case sizing, even though it's a 2-cell battery. So that's the whole new thing. It's like a slim shorty. Slim shorty. Yeah, all right, anyways. So yeah, that's the first thing I wanted to note, just so you don't get twisted off that, or if you don't have a slim shorty, you should get one. A lot of the higher end cars, like the MC1 and TDP, the Team Drift Pigeon, that one, they usually run the 1S size shorty. So just so you know. Yes, and other than that, let's dive right in. Step 1, the gear assemblies. Gear differential assembly, sorry. I was just moving my light over here. You can see my camera shadow. Anyways, gear diff. Step 1, pretty straightforward. I didn't write anything on this sheet, but yes, just pay attention when you assemble the diff. Make sure to put that O-ring in the diff. That seals the oil from coming out of the outer joints. You can put some green slime on it if you want. They don't include it, but you can if you want. And yeah, that's to make sure to pay attention when you put that pin in through there. Do it like that. Put the pin in through the side of the diff casing there, and not through the side, sorry, but in the indentation where the gears will sit. Just slip it in there, and that's the easiest way to get that pin in there inside of the wider diff case area. And then well, it says here to pre-fill the oil first. I like to put all the gears in and then pack the oil in there. And then even when the oil's in there, just hold down this cross piece and spin the diff so the oil moves around the gears nicely. And straightforward, don't over tight the screws because you're screwing into plastic, and don't forget the gasket. Very straightforward. Put some oil in the bearings too if you want. Excuse me. And that's pretty much step 1. That's straightforward. Just take your time, as always. Don't rush. Yeah. And what I was saying in the unbox about the manual rendering a little dark, even when I look at it in some light, some shades or angles, the parts look darker than they are. So yeah, you might have to squint a little bit. Even on cam here, you might notice some of it looks a bit dark until you stare at it for a bit. So it's kind of why I'm going over this as well. But Constructor's Digest is for everybody. Number 2, step 2, front and rear suspension arm assembly. Straightforward, but definitely pay attention, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up and put the parts the wrong way. I like to use, you can see it in the light, you have reference from where the holes are being placed and stuff. And this is showing, which side does this show? This is the left side. This is showing the left arm. So just when I did this, I assembled one arm like this and then did the mirror right beside it, sort of step by step. That's the easiest way I find, instead of doing one whole one and then doing another one, because you might get a part backwards or whatever. But this one, yeah, you do 4 screws on one side of this piece and then 2 screws on the other. So you start 2, go to 4, and then you should be done. So just take your time, because there is an orientation to how those go, and how where the ball stud goes and all that. Excuse me, to have partial hiccups. I did write here the word weight, and the reason is they tell you to put the hinge pin and the spacers into the arm. They tell you this, and that's good, assembled view, but then you don't actually stick them into the car until the next page, so to say. So you're going to be waiting on them like a tiny bit, but like I just put weight because I always end up losing one, or one falls off, or it just falls out. So I put weight. So do the arm and then just leave these hinge pins until you go to actually put them in the toe blocks, which is only like, you know, another step or so over, but it makes life easier. If you got one of these magnet mats, just leave them in there, and then it makes life so much easier after. Same for this. This is the front suspension arm, the upper side, the upper part, sorry, the left side. So do the same thing, mirror one right after, like as step by step. Spacer there. I wrote the same thing, weight. Just wait on the hinge pins until you're actually ready to put them in the chassis piece right here. Chassis piece on the chassis. Gives it just, yeah, makes your life easier. Here I wrote, so once you're done the arms, here I wrote leave a bit loose. And the reason is, so this is the chassis. These are the toe blocks that go on the innermost parts of the chassis, the inner side. So it would be the rear side of the front end and the front side of the rear end. So don't get that twisted too much, but the holes here will point that way, and the holes for these ones will point to the back of the car. But yes, leave the screws just a little bit loose, because on the next page we continue step 2. We're still not over step 2 yet. We then installed the front arms and the front upper arms and the front lower arms. So here I wrote tighten along with the front toe block, this piece. And the reason why I said leave these little blocks loose is so that you can put these arms in with their, at this point, do the spacers, get your hinge pin and spacer, and then do it all at once instead of having the parts like assembled on your bench, because they always fall off for me. But when you do this, when you install the arms into these toe blocks and leave the screws loose for them, it'd be way easier to fit this piece into its slot, because there's 2 metal poles that are coming out of the part, as you can see here, and that slots into 2 of those holes up front because there's only 1 screw. So yeah, you leave it all loose, the blocks, slide the arms in, put the front toe block piece in here, it should slot right in nice and easy. Tighten everything up. Same for the rear end. I wrote tighten along with the rear toe block, same idea. Get those hinge pins and spacers, load them into the rear toe blocks, which are still loose at that point. Do the rearmost toe block mount, the one piece. This is the one that you'll change out to change the toe. And same thing, 1 screw. It's got the metal pieces to slot in. Put it in when it's all loose. Tighten it up, and away you go. And it's a little bit more smoother. Then you don't have to press this piece in when these are tight. You tighten it all at once. So that's that. That's the step 2. All right, step 3, front and rear bulkhead installations. Now, not too much happens with the front bulkhead right away, except for this piece. And just make sure you get the orientation right. The rounder sides there on the back side of what this would be like the, I guess you could call it the inner part of this area. This is upside down. We start with this upside down, and then we flip it to put it on the chassis. This front bulkhead part is this part up in there. So 4 screws, away you go. And then you get right into the steering rack assembly. I wrote here, screws will be tight in this part. Now that's when you put this screw into this part, because this is going into plastic. So you'll put this screw into here, and it will thread through and tighten up. So this screw will be tight in this part, and that's okay. That's fine, because it's going through ball bearing, which the ball bearing then sits in the metal rack, steering rack, and then is put on by a small M3 nut, and that sits nicely in the steering rack. And that screw, this screw here, even though it's threaded into here and will be tight in this steering arm part, you'll tighten this nut to tighten the steering rack onto it, and use some Loctite here because you're going into metal here. Anytime you're screwing screw into metal or aluminum, use some Loctite. If your whole car is carbon and aluminum, yeah, use some use a dab of Loctite just to keep it nice and tight, because otherwise boost and or rev limit stuff, that puts a lot of jolting through the chassis, and over time your stuff will come loose. Boosting alone, your stuff will come loose over time. Happens all the time. I see it all the time at the track. Anyways, back to the steering. So once you've done that, don't forget your ball studs, and then we move from here to here. Straightforward installation, take your time. And here I like to put a dab of Loctite on these screws because you'll be threading into here, and this constantly moves, so you need the Loctite there, and I'm surprised they didn't show it over here. But if you put Loctite here on that post, then that will secure the steering arms to its steering post, and then I'd put a little bit of Loctite on the half of the side here, because half of this set screw down here is going into the bulkhead, which is plastic. But that steering post, put a little Loctite on the Allen screw here once it's in the bulkhead, and that will help keep this steering post attached to here tightly, so your steering rack will stay in nice and tight. Will stay assembled and tight to the yes, it will all stay assembled. Sorry, brain shut off there. Loctite partial there, Loctite there, and Loctite there. Okay, and then your rack will stay attached to the bulkhead nicely for a long time. And it also says here, I'll make a note, it says to cut this bit out. Actually, I think on mine I forgot to do it, but they do say to trim that out just so you get the proper steering lock. Like it's a tiny bit amount you got to trim out. Weirdly, for my car, the way this is going, mine's actually all right. But if you look in there, you might be able to see that I'm like just ever so slightly touching it, so I should trim it at some point. But it's working for now. But it's a good idea to trim that. I actually forgot. But that's that. Okay, so once you get to here, finished the steering rack into the front bulkhead, you'll install it into here. Okay, 6 screws, and I said star pattern, so pick one, go star, do the whole star pattern thing, and then it tightens down nice and even, and that's that. Now after the front bulkhead, we move into the rear bulkhead, which is still step 3. Okay, now this is where you really got to pay attention, because a bunch of people got this backwards and ended up screwing up their transmissions and frying the gears, because while most of the transmission gears are metal, the diff ring gear is plastic. So this is the gear that got eaten up a lot when these got backwards. So definitely Loctite these parts in here, as it shows here, Loctite, Loctite. So Loctite that set screw on that gear, Loctite that screw that goes into this shaft, Loctite there, of course. Yes, you'll notice this says 14T metal bevel gear. The 14 tooth gear has the set screw, okay? Remember that. The 13 tooth gear that's used right here, no set screw. I made a note as well. There's no set screw on that screw. And this becomes crucial when you go to assemble it into the rear bulkhead, which weirdly you build this piece, but it doesn't show up till here down the road. So, but you need to complete this installation anyway. So, put some oil in the bearings. But yeah, do that, assemble, away we go. Okay. But only one of these gears has a set screw, and that helps to identify them later. So I'm glad they did that. That was a good move. Either way, they're both bolted in with screws, so put Loctite on them. They'll stay in there. Yeah, then you assemble the rear bulkhead, and this does show screw only on the one side first, so it's kind of funny that you put it in sort of together with the diff in it. And it's weird that it's funny that you put the diff in now, because the piece that holds the diff in doesn't show up till way down here, step 7, which is the rear shock tower assembly that holds the diff in. But you need the diff sitting in there because you'll install part of the transmission ahead of time, so the diff gear will still fall out, so just FYI that. But we go back to here, so complete it, rear bulkhead assembly, and install this piece, the upper chassis side mount to the chassis in front of that rear bulkhead. So you notice how this is upside down and then they flip it. Yeah, and then 6 screws down here. There's 2 for this piece, do those 2. I said leave loose times 6, it's actually times 4. I need to addendum that if I actually scan this out to the computer. That's supposed to be times 4, because these 2 screws you can tighten for that part, but the rear bulkhead I left a touch loose, and that's because a good amount of things bolt to the rear bulkhead towards the end of assembly, so just leave them a touch loose, and then once you get the top side of the rear bulkhead, then tighten everything, and I'll come to that. And as well, give this a little trim out as it shows, just to make sure you get it right. Trim that out. That will help for fitment later. Okay. Other than that, that's pretty straightforward. And then we move on to step 4, upper deck installation. Okay. Don't forget the spacer here in the front. Otherwise, it's very straightforward. Screw into that piece, the piece right here. That's where you screw that to. And then you do the screws on the right side of the car for those 2 pieces, the gyro tray and the upper deck mounting block. Okay, straightforward. That's what it looks like. So, and oh yeah, 2 screws in the side, 2 screws here are for the bottom, so you can see those right here. Moving over, this piece right here is talking about the block under there that goes for that. And the gyro tray is what this is sitting on right here. See? Gyro tray. So that's where that goes. That's where the 2 screws underneath go, sorry. Under here. Those 2 screws there. Those 2 screws are for that middle piece. Okay. Moving along to the other side of the upper deck. Okay. Don't forget the spacer. Other side of the upper deck. On it goes. And then this is where you pay attention. So I wrote set screw on this face of this gear. Okay, this gear, the set screw gear, will be facing the front of the car. See the front of the car, and I'll show it on the actual car. So it even makes a note, the 14T metal bevel gear with set screw is behind, which behind it, the wording there is a bit goofy, and I see why people kind of get it messed up. What they want you to do is put the transmission gear, the 14T tooth one that has the set screw, they want you to put that to the front, but they worded it kind of silly, or the translation didn't go. So you can see we got a gear there in the transmission from the set screw here, or set screw from the spur gear. There's a set screw in that gear, and then in the transmission there's a set screw, set screw, set screw. Okay, so to the 2 gears with set screws should be meshed with each other. The gear that has no set screw, see that back there? No set screw. That's the one that goes for the diff, diff ring gear. Okay, so just to clarify that again, set screw, the gear with the set screw goes to the front of the car. Okay, the gear with no set screw touches the diff. So I just want to make that clear, because some people did get it wrong and they killed their transmission pretty quickly. Yeah, so that's that. And then we move down, and don't forget there's 2 gears, 2 screws on one side of this piece and 1 for the other side, because the other screw that holds it in on the top side is a long screw. 3 spacers in between the motor mount, and it bolts on. And on the one side there is a nut that goes on, and I forget, it goes through, there's a nut here. Yes, it goes underneath. So I was wondering why I had an extra nut. I remember this on other D5s. I forgot to put that nut on, but there's a screw underneath the bulkhead. There it is. You can see it just by the gear, I think. By the ring gear there. I forgot to put a nut on it, but it's buried inside of there. But that's the nut that they're talking about here. It's on the underside of that. And you'll see a screw that goes through, and then it's just sitting there. Just put a nut there, because it does thread through, but the nut is just to secure it. So I will put that on, because I did wonder why I had an extra nut sitting out on my magnet tray. So that's one thing I actually did miss, but I do remember this from other D5. So it's good I do these Constructors Digest. I can go back and make sure I got everything, and I missed that. So once you get this plate on, which is the motor mount plate, this plate, okay, that plate has 3 spacers, like I said, and then it shows here these 2 screws. You don't have to tighten them super tight, just barely snug them up. Pretty much it's It's, which one? Button screws, 4 pieces. 10 by, the M3 by 10 and the M3 by 18. So M3 by 18 and these M10 ones. So they're saying you don't have to tighten them super tight, just snug them up. Yeah, just make sure they're nice and snug. Don't super tighten them because that's part of the transmission. You'll pinch too much. But just make them nice and snug and they'll be good. And wait, go. I just had to make sure I read that again. Okay, so that's that. Upper deck installation. Now you should have the upper deck all installed at that point. Where are we now? Bag. You're needing bag 3 for step 5, the drivetrain, the rest of the drivetrain. So you got like half the transmission built basically. This is the main input shaft and the spur gear, etc. And again, see, another 14-tooth gear with a set screw. And don't forget to use Loctite, and they forgot to mention that here. Pretty much use Loctite, you know, like I said, on any moving part or a screw that goes into aluminum or metal. Just a dab and away you go. This is straightforward, but I wrote a note, tighten first. So install the main shaft and make sure you get the bearings right because they are 2 different sizes. The inner races is different size on the inside. Okay, because there's a thick area and a thin area. Install the shaft, and right after, get the shaft in, put the gear in first. So install the gear onto the shaft. Once the shaft is in, it'll only go so far because of this different sizing. Once it's in with the gear, tighten that set screw on the flat area of that shaft first, then do the E-clips after you, sorry. Let me go through this again. When you're putting through the shaft, when you're, oh my god. Mouth and brain not cooperating. Here we go. When you put the shaft into the transmission, put the gear and the spacer, okay? Gear and spacer. Once that's in, tighten the screw on the shaft with Loctite. Then your spacer will already be in there. And then, once that's tight, then put the E-clips in. After you do all that, then put the nut on. That will be the easiest way and most simplest way to get this transmission, this input shaft installed and most correct, so that gear is on the flat part of the shaft and everything will be good there and you'll have a nice nice assembled transmission. Once you get that on, don't forget the brass spacer and install your spur gear. Don't forget the pin once you get the adapter on. Brass spacer, then adapter, then pin. Okay? And then when you put the spur gear on, do a star pattern for tightening and don't over tighten them. Otherwise that will warp. That will warp the spur gear. We don't want that. Okay? And the last thing to check is when you install the main shaft, make sure you got about 1 millimeter's worth of thread showing between the end of the shaft and that lock nut, because you don't want to over tighten this as well. Okay? Sounds good. Step 6, steering servo assembly. I thought I was gonna sneeze. Sorry. So if you're installing a servo, like if you have all your electronics ready to go at time of build, that's fine. If you don't, it's okay too. It's no big deal. I didn't have any electronics ready to go when I built it, so I built it just as a roller with no electronics. And you can do that because you can just build it, take it to the track, finish it there or whatever. So if you do, make sure you put aside your ball stud, steering horn, and there's like a couple other little pieces like your pinion gear and stuff if you don't put the electronics in. But if you have your servo, this is where you install it. If you don't, just install your screws with the blocks and the nuts and just tighten them all up there so you don't lose them, but they're there for your installation and they're on the chassis. If you got your servo, away you go. And what I like to do is, before you install the servo horn, if you can, which you should be able to, power up the servo with something, another car or the electronics just sitting on the bench. Power it up, get your transmitter and everything trim zero, sub trim zero, everything all zeroed out. Brand new transmitter model selected in the radio so that you can start fresh, but everything's zeroed out. And then when it's powered up, I like to do it without a gyro when you're putting the horn on. Install all your electronics, or power up your electronics without gyro, plug the servo into the receiver, whatever, power it up. The servo will then center when it detects the radio. Then this will be the most centered it can be when you install the horn on the chassis. When you do that, you may end up with a slight, you know, turn to the right or the left. You might end up with a slight bit of this, but it'll be the most centered it can possibly be, rather than you not powering it up and you put your servo horn on, and then it looks good like this on the bench, and when you turn your car on, your everything centers as it talks to the radio, but because it wasn't centered when you the horn wasn't centered when you first installed it, when the radio centers, it goes and that's your center point, and then you either have to sub trim out, which half the time doesn't work, or you have to start all over again. So that just prevents you from doing that later. And then if you do it with the whole power it on, center it first, and you just have a slight off centering, you go and you sub trim like, you know, 5 to 10% instead of like 55. So that's that. Just to give you a heads up, I like to do it like that. But if you don't do a servo, you're going to do all later, no big deal. They do make it pretty accessible to get at that servo horn screw right through that bottom of the chassis there. And there's lots of room to get the ball stud on and all that, so it's not too hard to do. Assemble your turnbuckle, and away you go. Even if you're not doing a servo, get the turnbuckle done, bolt it into the front end of the bulkhead so that your servo horn here, the arm is waiting for you to drop a servo in, okay? Pretty straightforward. And everything should move freely when you've done that. Oh yeah, I should have pointed that out as well. When you're installing all the suspension pieces, upper arms, lower arms, they should all move freely. If they don't, something is binding right away, something's too tight or not right, or you got too many spacers, etc. It should be moving freely so that you have the chassis is able to do its suspension. Okay. Steering servo complete. Step 7, the rear shock tower. Now this is where we put the rear shock tower on, but it also holds the rear differential, so it's like a 2-in-1. So you're going to have to assemble these bulkhead covers, top of the rear bulkhead basically. Do the mirroring thing, and remember the spacers, and yep, build 2 of those assemblies, because that down here you build 2 assemblies and you put a post in the middle, and you have your assembled piece. Your shock tower here bolts to that piece, okay? You'll have it right when the screws of the shock tower are like that, and you have the pole. Where is that? You'll know you have it right when that pole is to the back side. See that? See this? The hump in the pole? That's towards the back side of the shock tower. If you've gotten it the other way, if you just try to install it the other way, it won't work. Okay? So that's that. And then once you take your completed shock tower bulkhead assembly topside to the car, 4 screws, it drops on, it covers the diff. So once I put the screws on the top side, I tighten them up. Forgot to write star pattern, but I tightened them up star pattern, and at this point you've bolted everything you've needed to bolt, upper decks and the top of the rear bulkhead to the bottom half of the rear bulkhead, which I said you can leave a little loose for this reason, because you're bolting so many things to it later. Tighten that, and then I went to the underside here. I wrote here tighten now. So tighten that, and then tighten the bottom side rear bulkhead screws, and then away you go. You can even do that when you install the rear ESC mount, which, look at that, that's pretty nice, eh? The rear ESC mount. You bolt it, you do the top side first, 2 screws, and then you do the bottom side. So when you do the bottom side, that's a good time to tighten those bulkhead screws there. Yeah, so that's that. Rear shock tower assembly, step 7. And with that, you move straight on to step 8, front upper arm installation. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Build your upper arms, do the mirror thing. Spacers, if you have your caliper, measure them just to make sure, but you should have 2 3 mils and 2 3.5 mils, so they want a 3 mil and a 3.5 mil on each side. You'll mount the arm towards the hole in the arm. This is towards the back side of the car. So here, if we mirror this, see, that's what it should look like. Okay, this is what it should look like, the upper arms and the positioning. And that's pretty straightforward, because once you get the assembly and the pins, this you can do all at once because it goes all together all at once. Put the the pin here through the arm with the spacers, because you move right into sandwiching them together, and then that goes right on the car. So that's a nice thing. And of course, once you bolt them on, check that the arms move freely, because if they don't, you've got problems. The car won't drive properly, basically. So just make sure of that. And then you continue right along to step 9, front knuckle assembly. where are we here? So yeah, you do the front knuckles first, and straightforward, just pay attention to where everything goes. And if the manual does do a good illustration of this, you have two different type of ball studs here. The chromy shiny ones go on the top, the dark one goes on the bottom, okay? And just make sure you remember to put the certain spacers in the certain areas. Okay, like for example right there, the spacer goes there on the top side. And then I made a note here, do later with wheels, and the main reason is because that hub just sits with that aluminum axle piece. They don't like clip together or anything, or like hold together. The only thing that holds them is what they call a quick release screw system, which is just a screw and a threaded rod, so not really quick release. And so I said do later with the wheels because half the time you're still moving the chassis around and trying to screw things together, and these will fall out. All of this will fall out. I've had it happen a number of times, so especially with this set, because this is the quick release. When it's the standard axle and nut, you just put this and the hex hub, and you put the nut on and it's bolted together. But that, it always falls apart. Yeah, that will fall apart. The other pieces will be in there because they're screwed in. So that's just a note for y'all. Do your turnbuckles and then bolt it right in the car. And then check to make sure everything moves freely. And away you go, see? Check to move freely. They should be able to move up and down freely. And it does. So that's that. Now we continue on with step 9, front and rear knuckle assembly. We move right on to the rear knuckles. Straightforward. Okay, don't forget these spacer shims. They're plastic spacers, go between the bearings. Not the end of the world if you forget them, but it actually makes everything real nice. So that's that, and same thing, do later with the wheels this plastic hub because that will fall off constantly. This drive shaft will stay in because it's going to be held in by a turnbuckle down here. So the rear drive shaft piece that you can install, the universal shaft CVD, you can leave that in there. You can install that because that will stay in, but the plastic hub thing, that thing will fall off all the time because it's not actually, it doesn't bolt in or clip in. It just sits in there and it falls out when you move the car around. Don't forget the set screw here on the bottom of the rear knuckle once you put the pin in to hold it into the rear arm. Okay. And with that, we come to step 10, which is the oil damper assembly, aka the shocks. And they are the plastic shocks, but they are threaded body with preload collar, so that's nice touch. But it's still plastic, so they will get weak quicker and will feel funny. I say funny, they'll feel almost different every other session. That's what plastic shocks do. However, straightforward installations, just take your time, pay attention because the E-clips are small. And what I like to do is put this all in first, or sorry, get the shaft going, put the shaft through the body, and then put the O-ring, soak the O-ring, just give it a little bit of oil, some of the shock oil, before you stick it on the shaft. That helps it slide past the threads and it won't cut the O-ring. So lube the O-ring up and then slide it onto the shaft nice, and then put it into the body of the shock instead of putting the O-ring in the body of the shock first and then sliding the shaft through it. So do that, bolt it up so you got the bottom end complete. Don't forget to install the preload collar and put the ball cup on the bottom of the thread. They show it using side cutters, so you can do this. You can just put the side cutter in between the screw thread and hold it. Kind of like, basically you're doing this. Oh, hold on. Basically this is a cheat way to do it. So see how the side cutter is holding the thread? You basically do that on the shock shaft. If you don't have a shock shaft holder device, if you don't have one of these, which shock shaft pliers basically, you put the shock shaft in between those numbers. They're different thicknesses of shock shaft, and then this just holds it, and then you screw your pliers on, or screw your ball cup on. But you can use side cutters in a pinch by doing that trick, and you won't damage the shock shaft because you're holding onto the thread. And you just pinch it enough to hold it, and you shouldn't damage the thread. If you damage the thread, you're doing it wrong, but that's one way to do it. They say to leave a millimeter of clearance there between the end of the ball cup and the shock shaft threading. I usually just screw it pretty close. Anyway, so it's like within 1 mil or whatever. Once you get that part on, then you can fill it with oil, fill it with oil, and then do the bleeding by moving the shaft up and down, and wait, you know, at least 5 minutes or so. Wait a little bit, let the bubbles come up, and then they say to put the bladders on diagonally onto the top and then screw the cap on. I do it a little bit differently. Oh, sorry, before you do anything, make sure to get rid of this flash extra plastic. They call it flash. It's just extra plastic on the top end of the shock cap, so it's where that ball stud is. It's the inside of the ball, it's the inside area, and there you will see a little bit. Just trim it out with a knife, easy to get rid of. But what I like to do with the bladders and the shock caps, I'll install the bladder into the shock cap and make sure it's pressed in there fully seated, and then screw the cap and bladder on all at once. You can do it either way, but I just do it the other way. 9 times out of 10, it's a one shot for me. Bladder in the cap, screw it on, bang, it feels great. Other times, nah, I gotta fix it anyway. So whether you do it this way or put them together and then do it, either way. And yeah, whether your shocks feel a little bit soft or they have like a good stiff feel, they'll get weak within a month, and they'll probably start bleeding out, like sweating or doing light bleeding where the oil starts to leak out teeny tiny bit within a day or two. That's what plastic shocks do. They all do them, so don't worry if that happens to you. This has already been run a day, and they don't look sweaty, but they look a little wet, so a tiny bit has probably come out. Big deal. They'll just get re-oiled in a little while. Once you finish building them, oh wait, that's not finished yet. So that's put the oil in. Once you finish the oil, put the spring on, put the bottom collar on. They're all the same for all 4 shocks. Away you go. And you actually get 100 weight oil, so it's soft oil. See, 100 weight oil. Soft oil, which is nice. The spring I think is like a medium soft. It's not the softest, but it's alright. Gets the job done. Now, to complete the oil damper assembly, they have you install the front shock tower onto the chassis. Okay, simple. And the holes they want you to use are the most inner holes there, you see that? And then install your front shock tower. You should have the ball studs ready to go, because the ball studs go in right there. Install your front shocks, and I'll tell you, the holes for these are tight, so pressing them on by hand, unless you got super strong fingers, good luck. So do the strongman installation. Get your the shock cap diagonal on the ball stud, and one side pliers, one side on the other side, and press it in. So I'll literally do that right here, right now. Let's see if I can do this for y'all. There. Make a little noise on the thing there. So let me just take this off. Same way to get them off, because they are pretty stiff. See, so it's off now, okay? So what you want to do, put it diagonally like that. Hold it. See how it's diagonal on the ball stud? Hold it diagonal, okay? Hold it diagonal. One side pliers on the cap here, one side on the back side of the ball stud. And, oh, and, no, come on, come on. There we go, got it. Sometimes you'll get a snap, other times it'll just kind of roll its way on. That one went on. Had to fight it a touch, but you do that to essentially pop them on like that. Going diagonal is way easier than going straight for these ones on the D5, because they are stiff. But yeah, you'll know you'll get it once it either snaps on or if it just... Hello, we're back again. The camera decided it wanted to leave the chat because it got too sweaty. It actually came on screen and said camera too hot, bye, and it shut off. So we back. Where were we? Install the oil dampers on the rear, on the front shock tower, and then front shock tower. Yes, front shock tower. Okay, that's where we were. Then on the rear shock tower, same thing, install the rear oil dampers, your shocks, and then for the ball studs, install them here on the shock tower. Now you can kind of see where they're going, middle hole. They are going middle hole. I just drew it just so you can see it a little clearer, but yes, it is going into the middle hole, so that's where they want it. And once you complete that, you'll move on to step 11. That is the, sorry, camera. Step 11, battery holder. So, install your battery holder. Those screws go from the underside of the chassis into the hex post. They will screw into that hex post. That hex post will tighten on the chassis, Then you can install the battery holder and then the lock nut on the bottom side, or top side, on top of it. And the other two screws are for the battery stopper there. And if your battery is a little bit longer or than what these posts are, you can trim them, but I just leave mine, I leave them alone, and then it just stretches a touch, holds the battery in place nicely. And they put it here again about the 21 millimeter high battery. That's the 1S case sizing, so you can buy the 2S in a 1S case sizing, the Slim Shorty as I call it. Slim Shorty. So that's that. Assembled view. And there it is. There's the battery holder in it. Once you finish the battery holder, step 11, we move right along to RC unit installation, which is the electronics. So they do the motor first, pinion gear, install on the motor. You can install the gear first because the motor just kind of drops in. There's no top part, so it just drops in, 2 screws on the bottom side, and that's how it installs. Nice, actually. And don't forget Loctite on that set screw for the pinion gear, or that gear will come off, and when it comes off it might damage a lot of other stuff. I've seen it happen enough times. It's pretty wild. It looks good on camera, but it's not fun for whoever it happens to. And then yes, gyro, that's where the gyro is installs. Typically you can put it somewhere else if you want, but not really too many other places to put it, but that's a nice spot to put it, on the tray, double-sided tape, and then figure out your wiring. And speed control goes on the back side, and actually I thought the speed control went on the bottom part and the receiver went there, but they're saying to put the speed control there and the receiver there. And I actually use the speed controller that has a receiver built into it, the Sanwa SV, the Sanwa Vortex SV Plus Type D, and yeah, that's got a receiver built into the speed control. So that kind of solved that problem of having to put something in the bottom. But that's the idea with that. You can mix and match however you want. On the which other car? The Opera D5. I think I did put the speed control on the very bottom and then the receiver in the smaller part. Just made more sense. So that's that. They do give you double-sided tape. I don't have it here, but they do give it to you. Once you're finished installing the electronics and or your servo, and if you don't have electronics ready, don't worry about putting them in. Sometimes I like to complete the whole roller, then do electronics. So you can do that as well. So to complete the whole roller with no electronics, skip step 11. Well, actually finish step 11 because it's half of it is the battery holder. Do half of step 11. Step 12, front and rear body post installation or assembly. The nice part is, yes, they give you these really nice magnet mounts. Like, hold on. Ugh. They're strong, like I tell you, they're nice. Like and when you double side it to your body, like it's strong, like it's good. So yes, I love that they still include those. Installation is pretty straightforward. Just go slow, straightforward. You can cut the post short if you'd like. They specify it down to the middle or just after the 6th hole from the bottom. I think I did 6, 7, or 8 or something. I just wanted these higher than the shock tower to start with. But yeah, if you want to follow the instruction, that's what you can do there. Otherwise, put it a little higher than the shock tower. And I put these two parts, this assembled part, in between there like that first, and then held that in place, and then figured out where to best put the magnets, as you see. And I use the outer holes there. I think that's what I use, and it's roughly about that area, but to make it so it wouldn't be as pinched as possible. And then once you get that assembled, you build your front bumper first and then put it on. Get ahead of myself. Screws, where you go, set screw. Try not to over tighten it, but it'll hold it in really nicely. Then once you got the assembled, 2 screws goes on the chassis. Then you move to the wheels. These are not the wheels. These are the wheels I used in the test drive video. The wheels I used are these, or sorry, the wheels that are in the instruction manual are these. The ones I used in the video are those. Right, it's a multi-piece wheel, 4 screws, okay, 4 screws, and it goes into the wheel hub assembly. This is all one piece. It's only that back piece that's the pattern piece, really. So you can change out the pattern. I wonder if you can change it. They'll make these with different offsets. Are you listening, 3Racing? Do different offsets other than 5mm. Because this looks awesome. And actually, I drove this around the track. It worked all right. Couldn't really see the wheel because it's black, but do more than 5mm. Excuse me, my nose is not cooperating. Anyways, Yeah, so install the wheels and away they go. That outer rim cover was already installed on these wheels, so that's that. Install them on the car. Oh, not yet. Do the rear body post first. It's funny. Front and rear body post assembly. Oh, wheels in the middle. Okay, and then do your rear body post. They want it on the middle screw out of the 5. And see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, middle. And continuing on, tire assembly step 13. Which is installing the wheels and tires with the scratch shim, the spiky looking thing, onto the car. And don't remember to put I forgot to write a note, but remember to put those plastic hubs back on the car so that you can install the wheels, and then you will have an assembled roller. And I will tell you, use Loctite on these, because during the test drive, off camera, 2 separate sessions, the rear screws for these quick release, the screws there, just regular screws, they came undone twice. Luckily we saw the wheel wobbling heavy and were able to pull over into the pits before the wheel came off. But use Loctite, just do it. Or we'll change out the parts include list here. We'll change out, because I will be doing it, having seen that happen twice, I will be changing that out. Where is it? Did I go right past it? No, it's just not even showing me the drive shafts, but... Oh, there it is. Drive shaft, sorry. I'll be changing out this part of the drive shaft for the non-quick release. And that's that. They give you some setup sheets. One side is blank and the other side is from Team Driver. I just don't know who. Oh, that's who it is. I just can't read it. But they do give you a pre-done setup for, what is this, an indoor epoxy track with medium traction available with a flat surface. Cool. So you could run that setup if you want to try it at your track or whatever. We run polished concrete, so it's a bit different. And my nose is beginning to give up. I don't know why, but we finished the video before the camera gave up again. Yay! Great success. So that's the Constructor's Digest, and on the very, very back, final gear chart ratio, and you'll get the ratios here depending on what you use for 48 pitch gears or 64 pitch even. This uses 48 pitch. Those gears are 48 pitch. And there it is, Constructor's Digest for the D5 Lite. Like, comment, subscribe if you have one, or if you need help on another area or whatever. If you have any other tips, thank you very much for watching, and yeah, be on the lookout for when I get a body on this car, and then we'll do some tuning, change the shocks. Oh man, this thing will be a weapon. It's going to be amazing. I already love it. It's so cute and fun. I want another one, actually. I want to order another one because it's just so good out of the box, and I can't wait to, yeah, tune it and do fun things. So yes, thank you for watching, and see you soon. Bye!